Hi, Scott Weaver from Factory Direct Designer's Workroom, and today's lesson is going to be how to make a simple lined valance. This is going to be a rod pocket valance using a standard rod. Now this rod requires an 1.5 inch pocket on it. We're also going to do an 1.5 inch header, a little ruffle thing on the top. That's what we're going to do with it. The first thing we have to decide is how much material we're going to use. Well, we're going to expand this out to say maybe 32 inches. Yep, about 32 inches. So now that would be for a window that's like 30 inches, 29 inches, whatever. So how much material do we need? Well, you usually use, for a custom look, 2.5 times the width of your rod is what you want. That's what I like to use. Some people say 2 to 1, and that's what they call the fullness. It's either 2 to 1 fullness, 2.5 to 1 fullness, 3 times fullness. And what they mean, what they're referring to, is the rod. So if your rod's 32 inches, you're going to multiply that by 2 if you want it a little on the skimpy side, 2.5 times if you want it a nice full look. 3 times is really more for if you're using a shear. Shear is very thin and you wouldn't line a shear normally, so you would want it a little fuller, so you'd use 3 times it. So to figure this out, this is what we do. We have a 32-inch rod, and you multiply that or times that by 2.5 times 2.5 gives you 80 inches. And you can divide that by the width of your material, or the width of your lining, whichever one is the shortest. And I'm going to say just for roughly 54 inches. So I'm going to divide that by 54, which means we're going to use 1 full width of this, and then we're going to use a half width. So it's going to be 1.5 widths. This being the width of material, so you can use one of these plus another half width of material. Same way with the lining. So I've already made my 2 cuts. I've got two widths of fabric, 2 widths of lining. And the first thing I point out with you, usually this happens, is the fabric is wider than the lining. Sometimes it can go the other way. Sometimes the the lining can be wider. But you take whichever one's wider and you put it on top, like so. I'm going to point out the length in a minute. Anyhow, and you also notice this has this orange stuff on here. So, this is Rocklon. I love Rocklon Rain No Stain. I love the feel of it. It's 100% cotton, which is all we use. The problem with it is putting this ink on it. That's horrible. I don't like the ink. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to trim down to get rid of this lining, to get rid of this wording. And I want both my lining and fabric the same width. So I don't think you can see this, but I'm going to drag this over to the edge of my table. Just going to move this over a little bit so you can see. I'm going to drop this off the edge of the material, and I'm just going to trim off so everything's even. So I'm going to be cutting off this lettering. We don't want that in the way. We don't want to make our valance and have any lettering showing through. Even if it's on the lining side, it would just bother me for one thing. But secondly, it could also bleed through the sunlight. If you got a light fabric, it could bleed through, and you'd see it from the face side of it. So we're going to get rid of that first. I'm going to trim off the opposite end. And I'm just trimming a little bit of the lining and the fabric. also notice, getting a little closer here, this is the fabric. It has this is called a salvage, and there's some marks inset a little bit. So when you find that, you want to make sure you get it all off. You don't want any of that on your valance. Now you're also going to notice something else on this. I'm making a 16-inch long valance. And with that, what I do, my calculation is this. If you're making a 16-inch long valance, you want the face fabric, which is this right here, cut 3.5 inches over that length. So if you want a 16-inch long valance, you're going to cut your material 19.5 inches. With the lining, your valance again is 16 inches long. You want to cut your lining 1 inch shorter, which is 15 inches. And what happens is this. When you do that, you can see where this comes, and when I sew it, this is going to come up to here like that, and that's going to give me like a hem. So keep that in mind, and it doesn't matter if you're making a 10-inch deep valance, then you would be cutting it 3.5 inches over, which would be 13.5. You'd be taking your lining and cutting it 1 inch less. It would be 9 inches. So it's a quick, good formula on doing valances. Now let's also talk about the lining too for a second. It's actually easier in my mind, and because we do so many of them, that it's actually easier to make a lined valance than it is an unlined valance. Because here we're just going to do some straight stitching. We're going to bring this up, which I'll show you how to do. We're going to sew it together, we're going to turn it, we're going to press it, and then we're going to sew our heading and pocket in it. It's fairly easy. But when you're doing a unlined valance, then you have to make a hem on the bottom, then you have to make the side hems on each side of it, then you have to double the fabric over and stitch it. So it's actually a little bit more work. And another point on this is when you line a valance, it looks much fuller when you put it on the rod. And it also protects your face fabric from sun damage, from it bleeding through and ruining it. So there's a lot of benefits to using lining, and I rarely ever make an unlined valance of any sort. Okay, so having said that, we went through and we know that we're going to need 1 full width and a half width, and here I've got 2 widths of fabric here and 2 widths of fabric. I'm going to show you a quick, easy way to cut off, and you don't have to do it this way, you can use your own way, but here's what I do. I just crease it, take my scissors, and I just cut it away. If you don't feel comfortable with doing it that way, then go ahead and measure it, and measure half, draw a line. But this is the easiest way to do it. I'm going to do the same on this. Okay. Now we're going to take some pins. This is the face of my fabric. You can't see that, but it's got a nice sheen to it. And this is my back side, a little duller. So I'm taking the sheen side to the sheen side. So I've got the sheen on this side, which is my face side of the fabric, and this is the face side, and I'm putting them on top of each other. And then I'm going to stick some pins in, because this is where we're going to seam it. Now I'm only going to sew this joining at 1/4 inch. and this is the only seams that are going to be sewn at a 1/4 inch. All the other seams are going to be at a 1/2 inch. And the reason why is because when we put the rod through the pocket, if you're sewing at a 1/2 inch, a lot of times that little hemming will get caught up in the rod. So by keeping it at a 1/4 inch, you're reducing the chance of pushing the rod through the pocket and having it get stuck on the seam. And really, that's the only place. Everything else we're going to be the top and the bottom and the sides. All the other allowances are a 1/2 inch. This is the only one that's going to be a 1/4 inch. Okay, with that, now I'm going to go over to the machine and I'm going to sew this at a 1/4 inch and a 1/4 inch. And then I'm going to press the seams. I'll show you how I'm doing that, and then we'll go on to the next step. So, I'm over to the machine. I'll be right back. Okay, I've got my seam here and my seam right here, and I sewed it at a 1/4 inch. I also pressed it, and what I try to do is press it so the seam is in one direction. It's a little harder when you're using thick fabric, like this is kind of thick. It didn't quite want to lay down, but that's okay. But now what you're going to do is with your material that's going to be facing your window, which is what we call the face material, you have that down so you can see the face side. So this is the shiny side, which is the good side. And then you're going to take your lining and you're going to put it right on top of it. And this is so you have the face side of the lining, the good side of the lining facing the good side of your fabric. And then you're going to get it all even at the bottom. And you're going to stick pins in it to hold it in place. Then we're going to go ahead and sew it. I'm going to do some pressing afterwards. Now you can notice how I stick my pins in, and I've made comments on this on my other videos. My personal choice is to have the pin going this way opposed to going in this way, following it. It's just my personal preference. Actually, it's a preference of most people who work in a factory setting, who do a lot of pinning. When you stick a pin in going this way, it can have a chance to feed in. But if you're not used to it, you pin it the way you like it. It's just my personal preference. Now let's go over to the sewing machine. Let's sew the bottom. Okay, we're back at the sewing machine. Got it all set up. I'm sewing on the lining side. I'm using just a mutual color thread. It's like an off-white color for now. The only time I'm going to have to worry about changing it is when I actually put the heading and pocket. I want to match that color a little better. So we're only going to sew along the bottom for now, using a 1/2 inch sewing allowance. Make sure you back tack as you go. Machine might be a little faster than what your average sewing machine is. Okay, we're done with that. Now we're going to take this over to the pressing board. And we are going to press that seam. Then we're going to bring this up to the top. And we're going to sew the top.